Hi and welcome to this fifth video in our series on executive coaching. I'm Harry Petropoulos, a founding director of Red Pill Performance Consultants. Red Pill is an Australian executive coaching firm founded in 2004 with offices in Sydney and in Perth. In this video, I'd like to talk about executive coaching qualifications. If you've watched some of the earlier videos, you'll recall that I said that as an industry, the field of executive coaching has yet to establish itself as a true profession. I suggested that one possible contributing factor to this is the fact that to date there doesn't appear to be one standard career path to becoming an executive coach. I also suggested that executive coaching is probably best described as a balance of science, art, and expert improvisation, and that the competence of an executive coach is rarely determined by any arbitrary academic degree or coaching certificate. But this doesn't mean that formal qualifications aren't important. It just means that on their own, they're usually never enough in determining coaching effectiveness. And while there are many career paths to becoming an executive coach, there are some fundamental things all coaches need to know. I'm going to try to identify several of these in this video. Now this won't be exhaustive, but it will give you the flavour of some of the models that executive coaches need to be across. Today, the practice of executive coaching is informed by a number of fields, including adult education, psychology, economics, and even philosophy. And as you recall in the first video of this series, I said I didn't necessarily believe that only psychologists necessarily make the best executive coaches. But to be effective, executive coaches do need to have some certain baseline skills, such as being able to listen really, really well, being able to ask clarifying questions that raise awareness, displaying empathy, and being able to work with people. These are some fundamental things. In addition, executive coaches need to be commercially savvy and understand the psychomechanics of human and organisational change. Other important attributes include the ability to suspend judgment, having a reasonably high self-esteem and an inquiring mind, and a somewhat less egocentric grasp of reality. Perhaps the most important attribute of an executive coach is their ability to know the limits of their own expertise and to be prepared when necessary to refer the coachee to another appropriately trained professional. And this is particularly important in situations where, for instance, the coachee may be suffering from some form of diagnosable mental health problem. Research tells us that professionals and managers tend to have higher rates of stress, anxiety and depression than skilled, semi-skilled or even unskilled individuals. So there's probably a very good chance an executive coach will encounter executives experiencing mental health problems in their day-to-day exposure to the coaching industry. Although, again, I don't think you need to be a psychologist to be an effective executive coach. Executive coaches do need to be able to recognise some of the more obvious symptoms associated with the most common mental disorders that they're likely to encounter among their clients. Executive coaching methodologies are founded on a behavioural science approach, and that's pretty obvious, and incorporate the scientific underpinnings of both cognitive and behavioural psychology linked to practical business solutions. Some examples of the research models that executive coaches employ include theories of individual behaviour change. Some of the better known models of change include the theory of planned behaviour as presented by Azzen in 1991, Albert Bandura's 1977 self-efficacy and social cognitive theory. There's the 1974 health belief model by Becker and the popular Prochaska and DiClemente 1982 transtheoretical model of change, which is a well-supported model understanding the stages of change, which is often used by coaches as a framework for personal change throughout an executive coaching program. To be successful as an executive coach, you also need to be across contemporary adult learning theories and theories of adult development, such as Robert Kegan's model of human development as applied to adult development. If we assume executive coaching is designed to help the coaching client move from one stage of adult development, say, to the next, this implies that executive coaches themselves have a fairly good understanding and grasp of the stages of adult development and are able to identify the particular stage their coaching client currently inhabits. The better executive coaches are cognizant of this and highly self-aware of their own developmental stage. And a word of caution, if you're in a role where you have to assign coaches, either internally or externally sourced, to coachees, it's important to avoid having coaches coaching people who may be at a higher developmental stage than they are themselves as coaches. Other techniques used in executive coaching programs include challenging individual assumptions and beliefs, particularly if they're unhelpful and self-limiting. Here, executive coaching borrows heavily from the empirical studies of both Aaron Beck in 76 and Albert Ellis in 75 in the area of cognitive behaviour therapy, or using psychological tough talk CBT. Solution-focused theory, as first developed by Steve DeShazer and colleagues in 1988, also forms a core technique in many executive coaching programs. Focusing individuals on the future and drawing on their resources typically underpins many one-on-one and group coaching sessions, in fact. Goal setting is also the foundation of executive coaching, and without goals, there's no real focus for the coaching conversation. Effective goal-setting strategies are based on the findings of Edwin Locke's 1996 research findings into the effects of conscious goal-setting and motivation. A good coach will work to raise awareness in their coachee and help take them from having a relatively opaque vision of where they'd like to be to a specific goal, complete with action plan and results. As a coach, your knowledge of goal-setting theory needs to extend a bit beyond just the SMART acronym, for instance. As a coach, you need to be able to understand the distinguishing features of approach versus avoidance goals, for instance, and which type of goals lead to greater self-esteem and less depression in the process. A good coach should also be familiar with how learning goals, or process goals if you like, and outcome goals affect motivation, learning and self-regulation. And of course, while listening in its own right can be enormously helpful, even therapeutic at times, in a coaching conversation, without a framework for your coaching discussion, the conversation will probably drift. Executive coaches need to structure their coaching conversations, and the structure of most executive coaching sessions is based on the GROW model and variations of this particular model. Now, the GROW model was generally attributed to Graham Alexander in the early 70s, and the acronym stands for Goal, Reality, Options and Will. There are some derivatives of this. It was the actual GROW model was later modified, promulgated and popularised by John Whitmore in his seminal book, which I've mentioned a few times, in 1986. Now, most people are familiar with the GROW model, so I won't dwell on it too much in this video. But rather than following the 4 GROW model sections sequentially, the really effective coaches tend to use GROW as a flexible, non-linear model, often moving backwards and forwards as the conversation progresses. Many coaches do, however, many coaches, I should say, like to start by getting a sense of the coachee's goal before they actually explore some of the coachee's current reality, because experience teaches that focusing on the current reality first, particularly if it's grim, tends to limit the goals the coachee is prepared to set for themselves. So I like to start with goal identification first, even if it's incomplete as a process. But although GROW is a useful tool in the coach's toolkit, I should say, experienced coaches don't just rely on GROW. GROW really just gets the conversation started. As your experience and confidence grows, no pun intended, as a coach you'll become less and less reliant on tools and processes and connect with the executive at a much deeper level. Other areas of human and organisational change an executive coach should be familiar with include adult learning theory, particularly the work of David Kolb and his adult learning styles, David Cooper-Ryder and Suresh Srivastava's appreciative inquiry model. There's complexity theory, existential theory, Gestalt theory, NLP or neuro-linguistic programming. Of course, there's positive psychology and psychoanalytic theory, psychodynamic theory, ontological theory, self-psychology, systems theory, and just to name a few. The list goes on. In addition to all the behavioural science stuff, executive coaches should also be commercially astute. Increasingly these days, an executive coach needs to be numerate, be familiar with their coachee's key business drivers, and they need to understand the organisational context in which their coachee operates. Now, it doesn't mean you've got to be an expert in the coachee's industry, but you need to have a very well-developed understanding of some of the key industry drivers. In particular, coaches must understand the dilemmas of their coachee's organisation and its culture, as well as the coachee's personal strengths and challenges. To be really effective, the executive coach must understand their coachee's dilemmas from multiple perspectives. From the individual level, in other words, what's going on for the person being coached; from the team level, in other words, what the group dynamics of the executive or other staff teams; and of course from the organisational level, how all of this fits with culture, systems and strategy. So while there are many career paths to executive coaching, and while each executive coach brings an individual approach and style to their coaching assignments, overlaid with their unique expertise, most experienced executive coaches are galvanised around the same theoretical models and procedural methodology I've outlined here today. In the next video, I'd like to discuss what some of the qualities are you should be looking for in selecting an executive coach, and talk about some of those in more detail. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you for the next video.